Hello, my name is Roxana Nazari. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the International Law Students Association, and this is the second in our series of interviews with remote coaches. Today we have with us Joe Fuchs, who's a very experienced all-round Jessup person, and I'll have him give a little introduction before we start in with the questions. Joe.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and thank you to Ilsa for having me. My name is Joe Fuchs. In my everyday life, I'm a judge based in Hamburg in Germany, very far away from public international law. But for that, I have my passion, my Jessup life, which started in 2010 when I started coaching a team in Germany. I then continued coaching up until 2013 and then changed to become a Jessup judge. I've been doing that for a couple of years with one exception, which was the Jessup 2024 season when I coached a Ukrainian team. And now I'm back on the judging side, and so happy to maybe give any sort of insights that I might provide, because I both coach teams in person as well as by remote coaching.
Well, we're happy to hear about your experiences today. So let's start at the beginning. How do you first establish contact with the team?
To me, this sort of happened, and it all depends a little bit on how you start as a coach. As an example, one of my German teams, I actually met in person. I was part of the team selection and part of the first 4 to 6 weeks of the team's preparation. And then I have to move 500 kilometers away. So I switched to remote coaching. So I had the connection already established before the remote part actually began. Now with the Ukrainian team, obviously with the war going on, things were a lot different. I had actually met one of the team members during a summer school, which is also how I got approached to become the coach for their university. But there, everything from the get-go was done via Zoom, remotely. So it all came down to trying to, well, get in touch with team members, getting to know them, selecting them in the very first place by virtue of online meetings.
And I can imagine that it's a little bit difficult to bond with the team when you're dealing with them only remotely. How did you handle that?
Yes, it is definitely a challenge, and it is one of those issues where I cannot give you the, let's say, perfect way of doing it. For me, it was especially hard, I think, because my coaching style, my teaching style very much relies on the personal connection, in terms of team members trusting me, trusting my dedication to the Jessup, and thus following my advice. If you do not have this in-person interaction, if you also have the technical issues of, let's say, the time delays that sometimes can happen, it's a lot more difficult. We never did any, let's say, social activities or any sort of get-togethers for the sake of meeting each other. I think what helped a little bit was that I also took many of the Zoom calls that we had with the team from my apartment. So by just simple things as my pets being in the background, they had, let's say, small insights into my life, into who I am as a person, and that helped a little bit. That being said, especially with the Ukrainian team, whom I only met after they had won the Ukrainian qualifying round, and when we were on our trip to Washington, D.C., it was, in my view, only then that the connection that I actually like to have with the team members was established.
You mentioned a delay with with meeting. Did you have any other technological problems? And also, did you encounter any cultural issues with the team at the beginning?
Oh, cultural issues, definitely. Not so much, well, maybe not so much cultural issues, but definitely cultural differences. Legal education is very different in different countries, obviously. One example, for example, is that Ukrainian students tend to be a lot younger when they participate in Jessup compared to German students. And the age gap of, let's say, 3 or 4 years can make sort of a difference. Another part is that, for example, in Germany, it's rather uncommon for students to have a working job of many hours per week in addition to their studies, which was very different with my team members. So understanding what their working rhythm is, also how much time they can dedicate to the Jessup makes for a big difference. And that is something I think every remote coach who coaches a team from a different country, different jurisdiction, needs to be aware of and as open to as possible. I try to adapt to as many things as possible. But for me, it was, for example, it was a surprise how difficult it was to even find time and space for our online meetings, because there was usually somebody who wasn't available, who had to go somewhere else. And sometimes the only option for them was to take the Zoom calls when they were in the train going back home on their phones. So the connection was not stable at all. Sometimes we wouldn't have video connection. This obviously is not ideal, especially when speaking together with a group. And also the mere fact of whether everybody has a computer with a working camera is another thing, because if students then have their small phones, the camera is much more shaky. It can be it can be a lot more difficult to understand them if they don't use a headset. So all those technical aspects come as well with the with remote coaching. At least for the team rounds, because we also had two more team advisors. One of them lived in Poland, the other one lived in Canada, which time zone wise, also another complication that just can happen, to see when we could even meet so that it wasn't just in the middle of the night for some of us.
And what would you say the time commitment was for you with the remote coaching?
So it was for me mostly, well, the team meetings as such. When we managed to get together, it was usually a one meeting with the group every other week throughout the memorial phase, and one meeting just between us coaches. I also then started having more one-on-one sessions when the Jessup season progressed, because there are many, let's say, strategic issues or also coaching units where it's better to have the group together. For example, when I described the process of memorial writing, of researching public international law, that's something where everybody had to get together. But then we started scheduling more specific sessions for, let's say, those students who worked on the first question presented, or just with both applicants or both respondents, any of those things like that. And then for the pleadings phase, obviously the mock trials that we had with the coaches as judges, that was for me, or that's the other, let's say, standard part of Jessup. In addition to that, I had to read the problem. I had to review their memorials when there was any issues, or when they felt they got stuck. I think in the end, though, remote coaching to me felt like a smaller time commitment in a way during the memorials phase compared to in-person coaching, which might be also due to the situation I was in back then, because for the German teams, I was also employed as a research fellow by the university who hosted the team. They had their own office, so they were in the same building. I saw them every day. I used to check in with them, and if they had a question, they sometimes would just pop by. This did not happen with the Ukrainian team. Again, also because they had their full workload of lectures, they had their jobs, so they also had many things to take care of. And the let's say the additional, more time-consuming hassle maybe was this entire matter of scheduling meetings. So that came on top. But on the other hand, the actual coaching to me felt much more focused. On the other hand, when I started as a Jessup coach, I had never participated even in the Jessup before. So obviously everything took me much longer compared to doing it roughly 14 years later with all the experience that I had, which might also have allowed me to be mostly just faster in the work that I had to do.
And you've talked a little bit about this already, but what are some of the other differences between coaching in person and remote coaching? I can imagine it's difficult, for example, to do oral practice rounds when you're doing them all remotely.
That is definitely true. Um, when the teams were, or when Jessup was mostly online during the COVID season, it would have meant that even with an online Zoom call, I can prepare the team members for an online round. But preparing a team online for an in-person round is tricky. Um, the core issue for any successful Jessup oralist is the connection with the bench and being responsive, reading the bench, and all those little details of maybe not interrupting the judges, or maybe giving them also the room to ask a question. All of this is trickier in when it's done remotely. I was in the lucky position that I knew a couple of people who were living in Kiev back then, who also did in-person rounds with the team, and who would then give me feedback of what they noticed about the team. So that definitely helped. The other challenge is monitoring team progress. Because when the team's present, when you see each other on a regular basis, not only can you track much more easier how much work they put in, but you also get a better feeling of where they stand in their preparation, maybe also what other things are going on in their lives, what issues are there. And this is something that I really missed for the online part. We also had a situation specifically where one team member ultimately was not able, for their very own reasons, to actually commit to Jessup and actually work on the parts that were assigned to them. But we only realized that after, let's say, 4 or 6 weeks, when there was always a good reason when somebody could not hand something in or was not available for any meeting, and tracking this process was virtually impossible. And then ultimately that person had to leave the team. And this is not an easy talk for neither party involved. Having to do this online, again, another challenge, another difficulty for remote coaching.
So how do you then manage the expectations, both that the team have and that you have, when, as you say, it's rather difficult to monitor progress like that?
I always try to be a realist about Jessup and about participating. I try to be realistic of my own contribution and also what the team members can expect. What helps me is that it is my very strong personal opinion that Jessup is not about winning. As great as winning is, and as much fun it is to be also a national champion who then participates in DC and gets to know everybody, or when you're in DC to advance to the knockout rounds. This is all great. Those are amazing experiences. On the other hand, I always tell the teams that for every team at some point Jessup is over. Even if you win the final round, the World Championship round, after the round, again, it's over. So for every Jessupper, the important issue is what they take with them from this experience. And what I can provide and what I will provide them is to help them be their best as a Jessup oralist. And that is also what I expect from the team members. And that is the spirit that I like to have, that everybody knows whatever happens after they get their memorial scores or after the results are announced of any given round, that they are always content with what they did, that nobody looks back and says, oh, in hindsight, we should have done all of this differently. And I try to start like this. I don't want them to be demotivated, and I don't want them to be stressed. Obviously, the Jessup is hard. Obviously, it's a very competitive environment. To me, it matters that everybody is satisfied with their contribution and with what they can do. And I would assume that this mindset also helped me with my coaching, because it's never to me about any external goals. Oh, you have to make it up to this level of the competition. I always focus on, let's say, the inner perspective and the students' values, because that is a standard that everybody can actually live up to.
Great. And what do you feel the rewards of remote coaching are?
It just gives you amazing insights into other countries' cultures. It enabled me to establish friendships with people whom I otherwise would maybe not have met at all, or maybe even in passing or briefly in Washington, D.C. I'm still in touch with my team members, even if it's just on social media. So that is something that I truly enjoyed, and which made it also more special. For the German teams, I was the coach employed by the university. For the team I coached remotely, it was quite clear that this is sort of an extracurricular activity of my part, that I would do it just for the sake of coaching. And in a way, the let's say personal appreciation also was different, or it was more noticeable with that regard. On a personal level, I also enjoyed it much more to coach a team from a university without a long-standing Jessup tradition. said university had participated before, but not continuously. So this idea that without anybody telling them how the competition works, how team progress actually works, they might not have had sufficient direction and might not have had, well, anybody in a way. And to have this special role is something that felt very rewarding to me. Again, also because I knew that this was a different setup from, let's say, coaching in Germany, where it's clear you have the 6 or 7 front runners, the strong teams. It's much more about actually winning the national rounds, advancing to DC. Remote coaching allowed me to actually build Jessup tradition, to share my experiences and, well, also in a way broaden the playing field, or elevating the playing field in a different country, because I was very lucky with my team. I had very strongly committed team members, and so they went to DC. And this just means that for the next years, the university will have alumni who have this experience. One of my team members is now part of the national administrators team. So again, they bring all of their own experience back home. And even if I won't be coaching there any longer, I think I helped contributing in a way to to Jessup in a different part of the world, and that was something very much fun to do.
Well, excellent. Any final thoughts before we leave?
I think it's very rewarding, and remote coaching is a great opportunity. I'm very much aware that it's also a little bit dependent on where you are in your Jessup life. What did help me definitely was that I started remote coaching so sort of late. Because even though I had maybe a little bit less of personal connection in the beginning, the mere fact that I had all of the Jessup experience with me, and the fact that I was roughly 18 to 20 years older than my team members, which was very different from when I started coaching in Germany, that kind of helped at least convey some authority to what I did. That being said, it's not a requirement. Even if somebody just graduated from university but participated in Jessup, I think a contribution can always be made. And it is also something that the teams will greatly appreciate, and forging this connection between people who are passionate about public international law all over the world is something that the Jessup is about in its core to me. So remote coaching is one facet that I can wholeheartedly recommend to explore if that's something anybody is interested in.
Well, great. That sounds like a very inspiring story, and I hope it will encourage others to undertake the challenge of remote coaching. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Roxana.